Hello, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome. Very excited to be here today talking about one of my favorite topics, which is how the world's leading companies are using data to drive growth through iterative product development. But before we get into that, quick introduction on myself. My name's Justin Bauer. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Amplitude. Like many growth and product leaders, I've actually had quite a varied path into my role. I actually started my career in econometrics, then decided I wanted to figure out how to apply my statistics background to the world of business. That eventually led me to product. I've led a number of different product companies and then joined Amplitude 8 years ago, where I've led product and partnered with a number of our customers to launch their own products, which is probably the favorite part of my job. Through that, I get to learn a lot from some of the world's most entrepreneurial and fastest growing companies, what helps them create, deliver, and drive growth through their products. And so I'm going to share a little bit about some of my learnings that I've had through that experience with you all today. Now, when you think about entrepreneurial companies, what image comes to mind? If you're like most people, it's probably something like this, right? It's the Steve Jobsian founder sitting in the garage, thinking about the next great product they're going to build and launch and change the world. And this is great for storytelling, but the reality is this isn't actually how the world's most entrepreneurial companies actually operate. Instead, they look something more like this. They think about how they can get 1% better every single day. This is a quote from one of my favorite customers, a company called DoorDash, and the food delivery service ended up going public a couple years ago. And they really think about how do they drive growth every single day within their product. Now, this statement on face value maybe doesn't seem that impressive, right? 1%, that's really not that much. But DoorDash understood the compounding effect of doing that every single day. That will always beat out the companies that are trying to do the moonshots to go for the 10 or 100% that ended up a lot of the times failing versus every day driving 1% better growth. That will compound to amazing results over a long period of time. And so, as product and growth leaders, it's our job to figure out how do we instill this kind of methodology within our organizations? How do we get to the point where we can drive 1% better growth every single day? And the answer to that is it starts with data. You heard Julia talk a lot about data. I'm going to talk a lot about data as well. It really is at the foundation of every single company that is hyper growth, driving a ton of growth right now. They think about how do they put the power of data into the hands of every single person in their organization that is impacting the digital experience. And that's what I'm going to talk about. How do we actually ensure that everyone has the data they need to come up with hypotheses and then quickly iterate and test those to see if it's actually helping them drive growth? I'm going to talk about a couple examples of companies that do this. I'm excited about the CEO of #PetFrenz, who will join me in a bit to share her experience having done this. But first, I'm going to share one of my favorite data-driven companies across the world, which is Spotify. Spotify is such a great example of a company that has consistently driven growth over their entire history. Even in the background, the backdrop of the macroeconomic environment, they're continuing to drive growth. And that's because they use data to think about how can they consistently test experiences that are helping them get 1% better every single day. Let's use just one example from the Spotify product. So this is the Spotify homepage, or at least what it looked like when I took the screenshot, and I say that because it is changing all the time. They experiment on every single part of this homepage. The tiles, the copy, the algorithms, constantly. They actually run over 250 experiments a year on this one page alone. 250 a year. Pretty incredible. They are actually a member of what I call this hyper-exclusive club of companies that think about how to drive experimentation at scale, the Netflixes, the Amazons, the Facebooks of the world, that are all members of the 10,000 Experiment Club. Companies who have iterated on their product over 10,000 times. Now, it's a pretty impressive benchmark to get to, but this is what it takes to build an amazing product experience for your customers. And so I'm going to share in a bit how you all can get on the path so that you will hopefully soon be part of this very exclusive club. And the key here is that you need to change your culture to being one that is all about hypothesis, data, constantly testing and iterating. Right? It's not that culture of the Steve Jobs that is deciding from on high everything that you build. It is instead empowering everyone in your organization to be able to run these micro tests to see what works and what doesn't work. That will lead to the 1% better improvements that compound over time that will eventually get you to that hyper-growth stage that you all are hoping to get to. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you build this type of culture that's hypothesis-driven? 3 key parts that I think are critical to make this happen. The first, on the data side, the foundation, you've got to be able to capture the entire end-to-end customer experience for all of your users. Second, on the insight layer, you need to be able to showcase how your product metrics can tie to business-level outcomes, and I'll share a methodology that you all can use to do that. And then finally, on action, you need to be able to quickly iterate on the user experience, measure the impact that it has on the product goals that you've set out. And like I said, the real key here is that this cannot be locked into the hands of data scientists. This has to be possible for every marketer, every designer, every product person within your organization. They need to be empowered to be able to do that, and I'll talk about some of the infrastructure and analytics tooling that can help make that possible within your organization. Okay, so let's start with the data side. Get to there. There we go. So data, the foundation of any hypothesis-driven company. And as I said, the key here is actually how do we capture the end-to-end customer experience? Because the reality is, for all of our users today, they're no longer experiencing our products through a single channel. It's not just mobile or just web, right? It's multidimensional. It's across all those platforms. It's on smart watches, smart kiosks, smart cars, right? All of these are all part of the customer experience, and it's critically important that we're able to capture that data so we get that holistic view of the customer journey. But just capturing that's not enough. We then have to be able to unify all those different data sources to a singular profile so that we can understand for every individual user what are all the paths they're taking, what's all the friction that they might be experiencing along the way. That foundation is what will then lead towards the hypotheses that you will test. And so you need to be able to answer questions like, how many of our users are likely to upgrade over the next 14 days? Or how many have made 2 or more purchases in 7 days after receiving a rewards offer? Right? This needs to be accessible to everyone within your organization so that you can come up with and test the hypotheses that are going to get you to that 1% better growth every single day. So once you've got that infrastructure in place, the key now is being able to tie your metrics to make sure that they're driving business goals. And the framework that we use here is what we call the North Star metric. Now, I could give an entire talk just on the North Star metric. I actually have, so if you look for me on YouTube at North Star metric, you can see a bunch of talks. We actually created a whole book on this, so I highly recommend going to the Amplitude website and looking for the North Star metric playbook. But the North Star metric is a way to identify what product metric really represents your vision, strategy, and the business goals that you're trying to operate. Think of it as like the guiding light, that singular metric that really represent what change you're trying to create within your product experience. And the key here is actually recognizing that you're not just trying to change the North Star metric itself, because the reality is a really good North Star metric is going to be a lagging indicator. It's going to take a while for you to see significant improvement against that, which is ultimately the goal. But to actually drive those changes, you need to think about what are the leading indicators of that North Star metric. This is your strategy. These are the levers of your strategy that are critical. And then what are the input metrics that you are confident if you change those metrics, it will ladder up to impact your KPIs and ultimately drive your North Star. And so when we talk about getting 1% better every day, it's about constantly making changes that impact those input metrics that you know if you can get that engine going and making improvements every single day on that, it will eventually lead towards the ultimate goal that you have for your product and for your business. Okay, so we've talked about data and capturing the end-to-end journey, the constellation of metrics to understand the types of things you're trying to drive. Finally, to bring it all home is about taking action, iterating on the user experience to actually make improvements against those input metrics. And the key here is that we want the ability to quickly test hypotheses and see the impact and change it has on those metrics. And so, one, we talked about earlier, the ability to use data to actually come up with a key hypothesis. You can then break that hypothesis down into the test experience you want to run and the audience you want to run that against. That will lead to a metrics change, and most importantly, will drive learnings. And that's what feeds back future hypotheses for you to learn. That's why we talk about this as a loop, because you're learning off of every test, whether it's successful or not successful. Okay, let's use a real-world example of this. So we work with a very popular ticketing agency, so a company that is a reseller of sports tickets or concert tickets. And they had a hypothesis that if they showed complete transparency of their pricing to their first-time users, that would drive higher lifetime value. Great, so very solid hypothesis. So what do? Well, they developed a test experience and a control. For the controls, just the usual experience that actually had the hidden fees that you experienced later, and the test experience was one that showcased the entire price all up front. They also identified the target audience, which was only new users. They didn't want users who had already experienced the control before to be part of this test. And then they ran the experiment. And they actually found that the experiment failed. That actually led to a lower lifetime value when they had fully transparent fees for their new users. Thankfully, they actually ran this as a test and avoided losing millions of dollars in revenue, but all was not lost. Yes, this test failed, but they actually learned a lot more about their users when they uncovered why did it fail. Actually looked through the data, they ended up talking to a number of customers, and they actually discovered that the reason why the control won was not because they bought more tickets, it's actually because they bought better tickets. And that was actually a really important learning for them. They discovered this was a key aha moment for any new user, that the user could get a better seat than they thought they could. So they used that insight to actually change their first-time user experience, and that led to a much higher new user activation that they ultimately tested and proved out. So once again, use the learnings to drive those future tests that you run within your product. Okay, so to bring it all home, to build a hypothesis-driven organization, you need three components that you got to get right. The first, on the data side, you need the infrastructure that allows you to capture the end-to-end customer journey. On the insight side, a methodology that allows you to tie product metrics to the business-level outcomes that you care about. And then finally, on taking action, the ability to iterate the user experience, measure the impact that those iterations have on the product metrics that matter to you. And if you do this, then you'll well be on your way to creating a culture and a product that gets 1% better every single day. But you don't got to take my word for it. Next up, I'm excited to introduce a leader who has built a hypothesis-driven culture in multiple companies, including now as the CEO of 펫-friends. Please welcome onto the stage Hyun-Shin Yoon.
안녕하세요. 저 펫프렌즈 CEO 윤현신이라고 합니다. Hi.
Welcome, welcome. So maybe to kick us off, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about your journey to 펫-friends.
Sure. I'm CEO of 펫프렌즈. 펫프렌즈 is the #1 pet commerce in Korea. It has shown very strong growth since its inception, so it has doubled or tripled every year. And even in this year, we continued our strong growth of 30 to 40% versus last year. So I'm very excited to be part of this growth journey at 펫프렌즈.
That's great. Incredible growth, and really excited to dig into some of the experiments you've run to drive that growth. But before that, when we met last week, I actually learned a lot about your prior experience and some of the learnings that you've had at companies you previously worked at that you've brought to 펫-friends. Maybe share a little bit about some of the prior roles and companies that you've been at before 펫-friends.
Sure. I used to work for Coupang and here.com. You all know Coupang. And here.com is Berlin-based company that sells hearing aid online. And looking back, I was so lucky to work for these both companies because both of them are very familiar with this hypothesis-driven approach in achieving the strong growth. They lived and breathed with this hypothetical approach with the data and testing. And I just loved it. And then I witnessed that this experimental culture is key driver for strong growth of both companies. So when I first joined the 펫프렌즈, my natural instinct was to bring those culture to 펫프렌즈 for strong growth. That was my needs, and then I'm very excited to have this journey until now.
That's great. Share with us a little bit about what the culture was like when you joined and how you've helped change that to be much more hypothesis-driven.
When I first joined 펫프렌즈 already has had a really strong culture with the super winning mind. They had a team with really strong execution. So my contribution was to develop this company and upgrade this company to next level so that they can see the data and then develop the hypothesis and test culture. Because, pet commerce is really competitive, and then to move this company to the next level, I thought that we need that kind of more data-driven approach. And then, so that was my mission until now.
That's great. That's great. And it sounds like you're well on your way in the mission. What were some of the early challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome those?
Many things, because I had to change how people work entirely. People used to develop the one right solution, and it sometimes takes too much time for them to develop one right solution because they thought that they had to do that. But instead of that, I started to ask them to develop the test idea and then test fast. And it took some time for them to change how they behave and how they work. But actually later they started to enjoy it because it's sometimes faster and easier. Instead of developing one right solution, it's more enjoyable to develop hypothesis and testing ideas. That was first challenge that I need to overcome. And second one is the infrastructure investment in infrastructure. We need to adopt the new data tool like 앰플리튜드 or Braze or 앰플리튜드 experiment. And then, yes, those are really great tools, but you need to invest some engineering resources to, really use those tools. So I need to invest in some tools or even the data infrastructure. You need to clean your data mart first and then started to retrieve really clean data to make decisions. So it took a lot of efforts in those areas. And then thirdly, I need to train people how to read the data. We always talk about the AI, machine learning data, but in real world, it was really challenging to find good people with the both creative mind and data mind. And then my choice was to recruit people with really great creative mind, which is really difficult to build, and then train them so that they can read the data and then interpret the data and then retrieve the learnings based on the data kind of things. It took almost like 2 years to train them in these directions. So that was the third challenges that I had to overcome.
Those are great. You were not alone. Those are challenges that we see in a number of companies. Let's talk a little bit about the first one. So going from that world where everything is about trying to get the product perfectly right from the first time, I called that kind of the Steve Jobsian, like we've got the best idea, to one where you're constantly testing. I found as part of that, you need to allow people to feel comfortable with failure.
Yeah, definitely.
And so how have you done that?
Koreans are freak about failures. We are educated to be always successful. So it needs some change of mind. If you are CEO of the firm, if you are here, it's relatively easy. You just don't need to be upset about or frustrated about the failed tests. I mean, almost like more than 70 to 80% of the tests fail. So if you give the penalty to the team for failure, you never will be able to build this culture. And sometimes I develop my own hypothesis and test idea, and most of my tests fail. So it will be really ironic if I get upset or frustrated with the team if they fail in any test. I'd rather demand the people to develop the test idea really fast, and then demand the engineers to develop the test fast. Because as he mentioned, the only 10 to 20% of the tests is successful. But it sometimes brings us really huge success. So to increase the percentage of the success, what we can do is to develop the hypothesis really fast and then develop the test idea really fast and fail fast. That is the only way to grow the company really fast, faster than any competitors. So that's my philosophy towards the failure. And then if you believe that, people just feel it.
That's great. I just want to reiterate the fact 70 to 80% of experiments fail. That is baseline. Think about all the things that you all have built, released, that you didn't test on. Most of those probably actually weren't successful. It's pretty humbling, and so I think it speaks to the culture. That's so important to build. You talked about the infrastructure that was necessary. You all have been Amplitude customers for a while now. You started with analytics, I think, in 2019. You started with our experiment product a few years after that. I'd love to hear a little bit about your process to decide to partner with Amplitude.
I strongly recommend to use global established tools like Amplitude or Braze if you are interested in using these tools, because it's more complicated than you think. It requires a lot of the investment in technology and all kind of things, and they have done these things for last 5 to 10 years. Yes, it has some errors, but it's better than any, how can I say, I don't want to blame any tools, but local short history tools. And also, please drop the idea of developing your own tools. It requires a huge amount of the investment. Really big companies like maybe Coupang can do that. Otherwise, it's much better always to search for good global tools with a long history and great reputation with the good people, good engineering team. And then why we chose the Amplitude, we tested a lot of testing tools when we adopt this testing culture. And we did AA test. What AA test means that we drive the traffic to the same solution. And if the tool is good, the result should be the same. Amplitude passed that bar, but many other tools didn't. I knew that Amplitude was a really good tool, but it really strengthened my belief in this tool. So that's how we started to use it.
That's great. That's great. And if you want to learn more about Amplitude Experiment, my colleague Ken will actually be giving a talk later this afternoon, so I highly recommend you check it out. Let's talk about some of the learnings that you've had. Maybe we could start with a winning test that you were actually surprised about.
Always I'm surprised with the test ideas, test result, but the one winning test was that we were obsessed with in new customer acquisition. We always try to optimize our landing page, which is the deal page with the product that we put on advertisement. We were obsessed with this idea that we should put only product that we show at Facebook or Google. So we didn't include other brands at that page. But one day, one junior joined the firm, and she brought up really fresh idea. Why don't we put some other brands that we don't advertise on Facebook and Google? And I thought that it's a stupid idea at first, but I didn't want to discourage her. And then, yeah, why not? And then I didn't care much about the test, and then. It was amazing that it increased our conversion rate by almost 15%. If you increase the 15% of conversion rate, it means that your total marketing budget go down by 50%. So it was an experience that I reconfirmed this testing approach and the culture where even junior can bring up really, seemingly stupid idea, but we support that test and then use it for our growth kind of things.
That's great. Such a refreshing story. I think embracing new people that come in with new ideas,
Exactly.
allowing them to test, such a critical part of the culture you're trying to build. What about a losing test, something that you were surprised by on that end?
Yeah, I love this test idea of the personalized app push journey. Using Braze. I love Braze, but Braze has really good personalized feature, and then we were sure that the LTV of the customer who got this personalized app push will increase, because we saw the app push conversion rate of the personalized message, and it was like 10 times higher than normal app push. So I was so certain that it will increase the LTV, lifetime value of the customer. But surprisingly, the lifetime value was almost the same between the group who got the standardized message and then personalized message. I don't think that it's the failure of the personalized message. I just realized that maybe we need to think more deeply how this personalized message can increase the LTV. So we are developing the next test ideas, how to lift the LTV of the firm with this amazing feature kind of things.
That's great. Yeah. No failed test is all a lost experiment. There's always learnings that come from that. Any examples of key learnings that came from a failed test that ultimately led towards something that was really successful?
Almost always, I think we are doing always like a crazy test. For example, to give you some interesting test idea, because we are the #1 pet commerce. As you can imagine, we are preparing to launch the other new services around the pet industry, like a community, chatting function, or insurance, healthcare, all kinds of fun things that we are doing. It includes our effort to sponsor the lost cats and dogs, 유기견묘. And then we tested one function that at the end of the checkout page, we put the button that you can contribute the 1 cent of your purchase to those lost dog and cat. Yes, I did it from my heart. Love for pet, but as a CEO, I did it for increasing the LTV of the platform. And because our hypothesis is that if we provide this kind of function, it will contribute to the LTV uplift. Yes, there was LTV uplift with this function, but it was smaller than we thought. So what we did was that to create the contents around those donations and then provide that to customers. And when we started to do that, the LTV uplift became bigger and bigger. So we realized that just by developing one simple function doesn't help that much. Rather, developing the story and enjoyment around the function really appreciated by the customer kind of things. So,
that's great.
yeah.
Such a great example of iterative product development, constantly testing and learning. Amazing examples, experiences. We'd all be lucky to work for you, the types of culture that you're building within your organization. Let's give it up for Han Chenju.
Thank you.